poor woman marries a millionaire in Coma to save her father's company, but 8 months later he opens his eyes and does the unthinkable. Before we get into this story, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Also, if you enjoy Millionaire CEO stories like these, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next one. The silence in the Kane living room was stiff with unspoken resentment. Afternoon light spilled in through tall windows, illuminating the sharp lines of Margaret Kane's face. She stood with her arms crossed and her designer heels tapping against the marble floor. "Your father's company is drowning in debt, and I have the only lifeline left," she said coolly. Her voice as crisp as the silk blouse she wore. Sienna sat on the edge of the couch, her eyes fixed on the stack of unpaid hospital bills in her lap. Her jaw tightened. "And you want me to marry a man in a coma?" Margaret's lips curved into a deliberate, cruel smile. "Not just any man, stupid. Ethan Calloway. The Ethan Calloway, a millionaire in a comatose state, but still legally alive. He may not live more than 3 months, and then you get to be free. His mother wants a quiet wedding to protect the family image, and she doesn't want her son to die unmarried. She wants someone with no ties, no voice, no scandal. Not a complete church rat, of course, but someone desperate enough to marry a man in a coma. And that person is you, Sienna. In return, she'll erase every debt your father owes. Think of it as a business arrangement. You owe me. After all, who took you in and cared for you after your poor mother died?" Sienna's eyes lifted slowly, locking onto Margaret's. "You mean, sell me? Don't be dramatic." Margaret adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist. "You've always been the obedient one. It's only fitting if you are useful for once." The words hit Sienna like ice water. Her breath caught in her throat. The woman she once tried to respect, the one her father had trusted, had just shown her true face. Sienna stood. "Why not marry off your own daughter, Evelyn? She fits your idea of desperate better than I ever will." Margaret's expression twisted with annoyance. "Because Evelyn is valuable. You're a burden, and frankly, if I could trade you for that contract for free, I would." A sharp ache flared behind Sienna's eyes, but she refused to cry, not in front of her. Her voice steadied into a low hiss. "You're unbelievable." "No, dear," Margaret replied, walking toward the door with practiced grace. "I'm practical. You have 24 hours. Save your father or let him drown, all up to you. Either way, I win." The door clicked shut behind her like a final verdict. Sienna stood motionless in the quiet room, her reflection staring back at her from the glossy glass of a picture frame. Her father's smile beamed from it, proud, tired, unaware of the storm looming over him. She swallowed the knot in her throat and picked up her phone. It rang once, twice. "Sienna?" Her boyfriend, Caleb, answered on the other end, his voice casual. But before she could speak, a second voice, soft, female, cut in, laughing. "She's calling again? Just block her." Sienna froze. She recognized the voice instantly. It was Evelyn, her stepsister. Her chest tightened and her stomach dropped. She didn't need to hear more, but fate wasn't finished with her yet. Caleb chuckled darkly. "Let her beg. The longer she waits, the more desperate she'll get. Once she marries the vegetable, all that Calloway money will be up for grabs, and I'll still be sleeping with the better sister." Sienna's fingers went numb. The call disconnected in her hand. The room blurred around her. The betrayal hit harder than she thought possible. Her heart didn't just break, it shattered into something sharp. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, stood still for a moment, then walked slowly to the window. Outside, the city moved on, unbothered and cold. She took a deep breath and dialed a new number. It was one she never thought she'd call. A woman answered, her tone formal but warm. "Hello, this is Mrs. Calloway's personal line." Sienna's voice was steady now, laced with resolve. "I'll marry Ethan Calloway. I'll save my father's company. Let's play a little game. If you've watched this far, drop a comment below telling me what you ate for breakfast today. And while you're at it, take just a few seconds to subscribe to my channel. It would mean the world to me. Thanks so much for your support." They were married the very next day. It wasn't the grand affair the Calloway name was known for. Just a quiet garden ceremony tucked behind Ethan's family estate. The air smelled of jasmine and damp grass. A few close associates from the Calloway circle were present, along with a priest who barely made eye contact with Sienna throughout the vows. Ethan was wheeled in, motionless in a black suit, his face pale and untouched by emotion. Machines hummed quietly beside him, barely visible beneath the trimmed hedges. Sienna wore a simple ivory dress. There was no music. There was no first dance and no applause. She said the vows with a steady voice and a numb heart. Her hands trembled slightly as she slipped the ring onto Ethan's finger. It was done. The next morning, Sienna woke up to something she didn't expect. Headlines. Calloway heir, married in secret garden wedding. Who is the mysterious bride of comatose millionaire Ethan Calloway? From nobody to Mrs. Calloway, inside the shocking union. Local blogs, national tabloids, even international gossip pages picked it up. Paparazzi had somehow captured grainy photos through the hedges. One picture showed her standing beside Ethan's wheelchair, her face partially hidden by a veil, but unmistakable. She had become a trending name overnight. By the weekend, she had moved into the Calloway mansion, a cold, echoing palace filled with priceless furniture and staff who barely spoke unless spoken to. Ethan had a private medical wing at the far end of the estate, guarded and sealed off. Sienna walked through those vast, marbled halls with a strange mixture of fear and resolve. Every step felt like she was drifting deeper into a life that wasn't hers, but now was. Her belongings were placed in a separate room down the hall from Ethan's. It was spacious and beautiful, but unfamiliar. It had no warmth and no welcome. She stood by the window that first night, watching the city lights in the distance. Her wedding band felt heavier than gold. She whispered to herself, "I said I do. I made the vow." There was no turning back now. The next morning, Sienna stood in front of the heavy door at the far end of the west wing. The hallway was quiet, almost sacred. A light scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, clashing softly with the warmth of the morning sun that filtered through the stained glass windows. She hesitated. Her hand hovered over the brass handle before she slowly turned it and stepped inside. The room was silent, except for the soft beeping of machines and the rhythmic hum of a ventilator. Sunlight streamed in through tall windows draped in cream curtains, casting long, golden shadows across the floor. It was more of a private suite than a hospital room, tastefully furnished with dark wood, deep blue linens, and faint traces of cologne that still clung to the space. And there he was. Ethan Calloway. He lay motionless on the king-sized bed, his face angled toward the window. His skin was pale but not lifeless, a rich golden tone dulled by stillness. His jawline was sharp, noble. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, a soft wave resting above a broad, quiet brow. Long lashes framed closed eyes, and his lips, full relaxed, looked almost like they could speak at any moment. He was breathtaking. Tragically breathtaking. Sienna took a few cautious steps forward. There was something deeply sorrowful about the way he lay there, regal and handsome, yet untouched by time or thought. He looked peaceful, but it wasn't peace. It was a stillness that didn't belong to the living. She reached his bedside and quietly sat on the cushioned chair beside him. Her fingers instinctively brushed her wedding ring. Her gaze lingered on his. "I'm Sienna," she said softly, unsure if he could hear her. "I'm your wife now." Strange, isn't it? The room, still and warm, swallowed her voice. "You don't know me," she continued, "and I didn't come here for love. I came because I had no choice." She blinked back a rising sting in her eyes. "But I'll be here, every day, until your story ends, or begins again." Ethan didn't move, but for the first time since she entered, the beeping on the monitor shifted, just slightly. Barely noticeable. Sienna didn't hear it. She just sat there watching his chest rise and fall, and wondering who he used to be before silence became his only language. Every morning, Sienna walked into Ethan's room after breakfast. She didn't know why at first. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was routine, or maybe it was the need to be around the only person in the mansion who didn't talk down to her. He was always there, lying still, his dark lashes resting against high cheekbones. The slow rise and fall of his chest was the only sign that he hadn't left the world entirely. She would sit in the same chair by his bedside, lean back and just be. Some days she spoke, other days she didn't, but over time her silence cracked. At first, it was little things. "Good morning, you didn't miss much. Your staff still think I'm a ghost." Or, "I tripped on one of your rugs yesterday. Nearly died, so thanks for that." Ethan didn't respond, of course, but somehow the space felt less heavy when she spoke. Then the stories started coming. She told him about her favorite book, a tattered old novel her mother used to read aloud before she passed. She spoke about the time she nearly drowned at 13 and how her father had jumped in, fully clothed, just to save her. She told him about Caleb and the betrayal, how it still burned when she remembered Evelyn's voice over the phone. One afternoon, she laughed through her tears as she recounted it. "Can you believe I was not willing to marry you because I thought he loved me? Joke's on me, huh?" Her voice broke. She reached for his hand, hesitated, then gently laid her fingers across his. It was warm, still, and it felt human. "Sometimes I think you're the only person who can't hurt me," she whispered. That night, she stayed longer than usual. The beeping of the machines faded into the background. Her voice, soft and genuine, filled the room like music. "I don't even know what your voice sounds like," she said, looking at his peaceful face. "But you know what? If you ever wake up, I hope I hate it, because if it's nice, I'm in trouble." She chuckled quietly to herself. Then she leaned closer. "Anyway, good night, Ethan." She stood to leave. Behind her, the monitor ticked on. The screen's rhythm held steady, until one tiny spike. She didn't see it, but something in the air felt different that night. Rain fell softly against the windows the next afternoon. The mansion was unusually quiet, and the weight of it pressed on Sienna as she wandered into the study. It wasn't planned, just a moment of rest after hours of pacing the hallways, trying to feel something like home in a house built on silence. Ethan's study smelled like old books and subtle wood polish. The shelves were full, each row perfectly arranged, with a crystal globe sitting at the center desk, untouched since the accident. She trailed her fingers across the spines of the books. Law, philosophy, economics, titles she barely recognized. Then, just beside the bottom shelf, she noticed a weathered, leather-bound notebook tucked awkwardly between two biographies. It didn't match the orderliness of the rest. She pulled it out slowly. The pages were full of sharp, confident handwriting. There were no dates, just thoughts, raw, unfiltered, and very human thoughts. No one tells you how exhausting it is to be rich. Not the money, the expectations, the masks. Sometimes I wonder if anyone around me would care if I disappeared. Sienna blinked, surprised. She turned the page. "I don't care about legacies. I want to create something real, something that won't vanish the moment I stop breathing." More entries followed. Reflections on grief after losing his father, the loneliness of being admired for his last name but not his heart, and the burden of being called perfect by people who didn't know him at all. Sienna sat in his chair, flipping through entry after entry. One made her pause. "I bought a little coffee shop downtown, didn't tell anyone, just wanted to see if I could make something for myself. The manager doesn't even know it's mine. Feels good." She smiled, small, involuntary. Another entry, a softer entry. "If I ever get married, I want it to be someone who doesn't need me for anything, just wants me. That's the real dream, but I'm not sure people like that exist in my world." Her smile faded. Her fingers gripped the edge of the page. She closed the journal slowly, holding it to her chest. This wasn't the cold, distant air the tabloids had painted. This wasn't the man she'd agreed to marry for debt relief. This was someone real, someone thoughtful, someone lonely, and someone she had never taken the time to know until now. She stood, quietly returned the journal to its hiding place, and whispered toward the hallway that led back to his room. "I think I'm starting to know you, Ethan Calloway." She closed the journal slowly, holding it against her chest. This wasn't the cold, distant air the tabloids had painted. This was someone real, someone thoughtful, someone lonely. She felt her breath catch. A man like that didn't belong in a coma, silenced by tubes and time. Later that night, she found herself staring at the ceiling in bed, the journal's words echoing in her head. Ethan's voice, his real voice, not the one people projected onto him, had finally reached her. And she wanted more of it. The next morning, Sienna wandered into the kitchen on instinct. Sleep hadn't come easily. Her mind had been too full, with his handwriting, his quiet confessions, the ache of a man who had no one to simply see him. She wrapped a cardigan tighter around herself as she stepped into the sunlit kitchen. The smell of toasted bread and ginger tea hung in the air, warm and familiar. Maria, the housekeeper, glanced up from the counter. "You look tired, dear," she said kindly. "You didn't get any sleep?" Sienna offered a small, tired smile. Not really. Maria nodded knowingly, setting a porcelain teacup before her. Ethan used to have those nights too. Said silence made the walls feel like they were listening. Sienna blinked, surprised. He said that? Oh yes, Maria said with a chuckle. That boy had more heart than he let on. Sienna lowered her gaze to the cup. Tell me something about him. Something I won't find in the papers. Maria paused, studied her for a moment, then leaned in slightly, as if unlocking a door that had long stayed shut. And that's when Sienna began to hear the real stories. Maria glanced around to make sure no one else was listening, then began softly. There was this young intern once, Sarah, first in her family to go to college. She accidentally spilled coffee on Ethan's suit during a board meeting. Everyone thought she was done for. But he just smiled, handed her a handkerchief and said, "Don't worry, first aid jitters, huh?" Sienna smiled faintly. He said that? Maria nodded. And later that month she received a full scholarship, and she never found out who paid it, but we all knew. She poured a little more tea into Sienna's cup before continuing. Another time, he overheard that the cook's husband had been laid off, and he quietly doubled the kitchen staff's salaries for 2 months and told the accountant it was to cover holiday overtime. He never said a word to anyone. Sienna felt a quiet warmth in her chest. And the piano in the entry hall? Maria asked, tilting her head. Sienna nodded. It belonged to a little boy from the children's hospital, which he built, by the way, and not many people know that it belongs to him. When the little boy died, Ethan had it delivered here after the boy died. He said it reminded him that some things are meant to be remembered, even after the person is gone. There was a moment of silence between them. The silence was heavy and beautiful. Maria placed her hand over Sienna's. He was more than an heir, more than the headlines. He just didn't know how to show it in a world that didn't care to look. Sienna's eyes burned as she looked down at the untouched tea in her cup. Ethan's face, silent and still in his bed, replayed in her mind. But now she saw it differently. Her marriage to him was no longer just a contract. It was no longer just an escape, and he was no longer just a coma patient. He was a man who had loved quietly, deeply, and without needing applause. It had been almost 2 months since the wedding. Sienna's days had settled into a quiet rhythm. Breakfast alone, meetings with lawyers, updates on her father's company, and long evenings by Ethan's side. She had stopped pretending she was here out of duty. The lies had fallen away somewhere between reading him poetry and learning the way his eyelashes curled slightly at the ends. He had become hers, even if he didn't know it. That evening, the sky outside was gray with soft rain, drumming faintly against the window panes of Ethan's private suite. Sienna sat beside him, a worn book in her lap. Her voice was soft, steady, as she read aloud. "I wish you to know that you have been the last dream of my soul," she recited from A Tale of Two Cities, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. She paused, glancing at him. "You'd probably think I'm being dramatic," she whispered, "but I read this part for me, not you." She smiled to herself, then closed the book gently. Her eyes lingered on his face, still perfect, still silent. But something about the air in the room felt different that night. It wasn't colder, but charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. She reached for his hand, the way she always did now, and held it gently. "I told myself I wouldn't get attached," she said quietly, "but I lied." Her thumb moved slowly across his knuckles. "You're the calm in my chaos. I just wish you knew." And then, it happened. So small it could have been nothing, but she felt it. A slight twitch, her eyes widened. She looked down, and his index finger moved again, just once, barely a flicker. She froze, heart pounding. "Ethan? Ethan, can you hear me?" She leaned in closer, watching his face for any sign, any flinch, any change. But there was nothing. But the machine to his left, the heart monitor, registered the spike. A subtle, but it was real. Her breath caught in her throat as she stood quickly and called for the nurse. Moments later, 2 nurses and a physician were examining him, running checks and whispering to each other. Sienna stood in the corner, arms wrapped around herself, trying not to hope, and failing miserably. "It could be reflexive," one nurse said carefully, "or it could be the beginning." The doctor muttered, reviewing the chart. "Let's observe." But Sienna didn't need their cautious words. She had felt it, not just the movement, but something else. A connection, a ripple in the stillness. As the nurses cleared the room, Sienna walked back to his side and gently touched his hand again. "I felt you," she whispered, voice shaking. "Don't leave me wondering now." Her eyes shimmered as she watched his face for the rest of the night, still waiting. But this time, she wasn't just hoping. She was believing. Let's play a small game. If you've watched this far, tell me the first color your eyes see. Drop it in the comment section below. And while you're at it, take just a few seconds to subscribe to my channel. Only those who are unkind will not subscribe. One twitch. That was all it took. And Sienna held on to it like it was gospel. 6 months had passed since that night, and not a day had gone by that she didn't return to his room, sit beside him, and believe. The doctors stopped calling it a sign. The nurses returned to polite nods and neutral glances. But Sienna? She had seen something that science couldn't measure. She started watching him more closely now, not just out of duty, but out of love. His breathing, the faintest furrow in his brow, the way the sun lit up his face when the curtains were left open. She memorized him like poetry. Each day she spoke to him, not because she had to, because she wanted to. She shared the little things. Maria burned the toast again. You'd think she'd let someone else near the toaster by now. She shared the hard things too. I cried today. I don't even know why. I just missed being touched by someone who sees me. She told him about the world he couldn't see, how the stock market was doing, how the garden was blooming, how her father was recovering slowly and now asking about her more. She'd sometimes bring his favorite cologne and spray it lightly near the window just so the room wouldn't smell so still. She even decorated the space, framed photos of quiet places he loved from his journal. Santorini, Edinburgh, lakeside bench in Vermont. She wanted him to wake up to beauty. Some evenings she would hum softly while massaging his hand. Other nights, she'd read books he once loved, not for him now, but for them. It became their rhythm. A strange marriage, yes, but real in its own quiet way. "I know you're still in there," she whispered once, tracing the line of his brow. "And I know you're listening." No one else could understand how her heart had tethered itself to a man who had never spoken a single word to her. But in that room, in that space between the beeping monitors and the hush of curtains swaying, Sienna had fallen in love with Ethan Calloway. Not for his name, not for his wealth, but for the man who stayed, even when he couldn't move. On this night, the rain had stopped hours ago, but the soft patter still echoed in the corners of the room, as though time itself was hesitant to move forward. Sienna had fallen asleep by his side again, her head resting gently on the edge of his bed. One hand lay across his, as if even in sleep she didn't want to let go. Her breathing was soft and rhythmic, but it also sounded tired. Then Ethan stirred. It began slowly, a twitch in his brow, then a shallow intake of breath more deliberate than the last. His fingers flexed, once, then again, and then his eyelids fluttered open. His vision blurred, his mind swimming through a fog that clung like a second skin. For a moment, everything felt distant. The weight of months or perhaps years pressing down on him. He blinked slowly. The ceiling came into view. It was unfamiliar, white and soft in the moonlight. The machines whispered beside him. They were steady and patient. Then he turned his head ever so slightly, and then he saw her, Sienna. Her face was turned toward him, her hair gently falling over her cheek, her hand still wrapped around his. She was sleeping deeply, the kind of sleep that only came from complete emotional exhaustion. Ethan stared at her, confusion laced with something warmer. There was no recognition, and yet, there was peace. Who was she? His body ached and his chest felt heavy, but he was not in pain. He was just full, like something long lost was pressing to return. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his voice caught somewhere behind months of silence. Still, he didn't panic. He simply looked at her. He could see it now, the thin silver band on his ring finger, glinting in the soft light. She wore one too. A strange tightness filled his chest, and a tear rolled down his temple. He had no memory of her. And yet, she looked like someone who had been waiting for him all her life. Her head shifted slightly in her sleep, her lips parting just a little, still lost in dreams. Ethan closed his eyes again, overwhelmed by the realization that somewhere in the darkness he had been trapped in, someone had stayed. And she was beautiful. He sat there for what felt like 20 minutes. Ethan hadn't slept after he opened his eyes. He couldn't. His body was weak, but his mind was suddenly loud, flooded with fragments and questions. Everything felt unfamiliar, except for her. Then she spoke in her sleep. She called his name. That voice. It had been there in the dark, every night. A soft balm against the weight of silence and the darkness. He remembered it now. He had clung to it without knowing whose it was. Now he had a face to match it. Sienna. She had spoken to him when the world thought he was gone. She had stayed when no one else did. His body trembled as he tried to sit up again. The machines around him beeped in gentle protest, but he silenced them with effort, reaching out, ripping a few monitors from his skin. Alarms blinked red, but he ignored them. He had to move. He had to see more. It took everything in him to swing his legs off the bed. His muscles, half dead from months of stillness, screamed in defiance. He gritted his teeth and forced his feet to the ground. They barely held him. He collapsed against the wall, arms trembling, forehead slick with sweat. But he didn't stop. He dragged his legs forward, slow, clumsy steps. The long hallway felt endless. The marble floors were cold beneath his bare feet, and his breath was shallow, but his will carried him. By the time he reached the kitchen, the sky outside was already changing. That dim, silver-blue hour between night and dawn. Everything was still. He reached for the counter, gripping the edge tightly for support, and opened the cabinet just above. He poured himself a glass of water, his hands shaking so much that half of it spilled on the counter. As he lifted the glass to have a gulp, his hands trembled, and the glass slipped and fell to the ground with a very loud thud, shattering and sending breaking sounds across the house. He leaned over the sink, breathing heavily. What happened to me? His own reflection stared back from the oven door. He looked pale, unshaven, and gaunt. His once proud frame had withered into something fragile, too fragile to feel like himself. And yet, he was alive. He took another slow sip, trying to gather his thoughts. The sharp clink of glass hitting tile jolted Sienna from her sleep. Her head lifted from the edge of the bed, her neck stiff from hours of leaning. She blinked, heart thudding, unsure if it had been a dream. Just another one of those cruel hallucinations where Ethan moved, spoke, smiled. But something felt wrong. She sat up fully, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Then she saw it. The bed, his bed, was empty. The covers had shifted. The machines were disconnected. The pillow, where his head had rested every day for the past 8 months, was cold. Her breath caught in her throat. All the sleep drained from her body in a single, icy wave. She stood quickly, the chair clattering behind her. "Is this a dream?" she whispered, voice shaking. She rushed to the hallway, her bare feet hitting the cold floor as she darted into the corridor, her eyes wide awake, panicked. Did someone move him? Unless, her heart skipped. Then she remembered the sound, the glass, the kitchen. She ran. Her hands trembled as she reached the entrance and pushed the door open, and there he was, Ethan, leaning against the counter, drenched in soft dawn light, pale but upright. A glass lay shattered on the floor beside him. He was breathing heavily, his knuckles white as he gripped the counter's edge. A faint sheen of sweat clung to his brow. But he was standing. He looked up slowly as she entered, his eyes finding hers. Familiar now, but different. He was awake. He was present. He was alive. "Sienna," he said hoarsely, his voice like sandpaper scraping against wood. She stopped cold in the doorway, staring at him. You know my name?" She breathed. He gave the smallest smile, wincing from the effort. "I heard you. Every night. You never stopped talking." Her eyes welled instantly. She blinked hard, trying to see him through the tears. "You idiot," she said, her voice breaking with both joy and frustration. "You could have woken me up." But Ethan's body had reached its limit. His knees buckled. "Ethan," she cried, lunging forward to catch him. She grabbed him under his arms, but his weight was too much. His strength had drained in seconds. Together they crumpled to the floor. It wasn't hard, more like a soft collapse cushioned by the thick kitchen rug. His back hit the ground with a dull thud, and she landed partially on top of him, her arms tangled awkwardly around his shoulders. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, Ethan laughed, a low-winded laugh from somewhere deep in his chest. Sienna looked at him, stunned, and then she laughed too, helpless, breathless, and full of disbelief. Tears and joy collided in one uncontrollable burst as she lay beside him. They were a mess, one barely able to walk, the other still catching up with reality. But they were together, alive, on the floor, married, and laughing. Still breathless from laughter, they slowly sat up, or at least Sienna helped them sit up. She carefully eased Ethan's back against the kitchen wall, her hand steadying his shoulders. He let out a shallow exhale and leaned his head back, eyes fluttering closed again. "Hey," she said gently, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "Stay with me, Ethan?" But his body was spent. His eyelids drooped, and just like that, he slipped back into unconsciousness. Sienna's joy was suddenly replaced by fear. "Ethan?" she whispered. No answer. Her chest tightened. In all the shock and wonder, she had forgotten to call anyone. Not Maria, not the doctors. No one knew he was awake, or now, not awake. Her senses snapped back. "Help," she screamed, scrambling to her feet. "Somebody help me." Her voice rang through the marble halls like a bell breaking silence. Within minutes, Maria rushed in, followed by 2 nurses and the on-call physician. The look on their faces when they saw Ethan conscious, even briefly, was one of shock. "It's a miracle," one of them whispered. They carefully lifted him and helped him back to his room, reconnecting monitors, checking vitals, adjusting fluids. Everyone was hopeful. And the next day, he opened his eyes again. This time he stayed awake, lucid, calm, quiet. His voice was still hoarse, and his movements slow, but the fog had lifted. Over the following weeks, a full medical team helped him regain strength. A physiotherapist came daily. Slowly, painfully, he learned to stand again, to take steps, to hold a cup without trembling. Sienna never left his side. She helped him dress. She cheered for his smallest victories. And every evening, when the sun began to sink behind the Calloway estate, they walked together through the garden. The same garden where they had been married, the same garden where she had once walked alone. Now their hands brushed occasionally. Light, lingering, natural. One evening, as the sky blushed with orange and lavender, they paused by the stone fountain. Ethan turned to her. "I have something to tell you." Sienna glanced at him, eyebrows lifting. "You sound serious." "I am," he said softly. "I remember everything, not visually, not in detail. But I remember your voice, it kept me alive." She didn't speak, just listened. "There were days when I couldn't move, couldn't even think. I was buried in darkness, this slow, suffocating nothing. But every night, I heard you." His eyes found hers. "Your voice became the only thing that felt real, the only thing I looked forward to. I'd wait for it. You read to me. You fought for me. You told me about your day, even when you thought I'd never respond." Sienna's throat tightened, eyes glossing over. He took her hand gently. "You didn't just pull me out of darkness, Sienna. You gave me a reason to want the light again." Tears slid down her cheek. "You weren't supposed to hear all of that," she whispered. "I was never supposed to fall in love with you from inside a coma," he replied, his voice barely above a breath. "But I did." And there, beneath the falling dusk, surrounded by quiet blossoms and the scent of jasmine, Ethan Calloway kissed his wife, truly kissed her, for the first time. Their first kiss broke slowly, like the soft end of a song. Neither of them moved at first. They just stood there, forehead to forehead, as the garden hushed around them. The fountain trickled quietly. The sky had turned a deep violet. Sienna's breath trembled as she pulled back just enough to meet his gaze. Her eyes shimmered with emotion, too full for words. But Ethan smiled, soft, steady, and reached into his jacket pocket. "I have something for you," he said gently. Sienna shook her head, still breathless. "Ethan, you already gave me more than I ever dreamed. You're alive. That's enough." His smile deepened, but his tone stayed quiet. "This is just a gift, a thank you for saving me." He handed her a thin, leather-bound file. Curious, she opened it slowly, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside were legal documents. She frowned, skimming the first page, then froze. Her heart skipped, her breath caught. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the rest. Company registration papers, ownership transfers, shareholder agreements. Her father's company, in her name. She looked up at Ethan, stunned. What is this?" "I bought out the major shareholders quietly over the past few weeks," he said softly. "And now the majority belongs to you." She blinked rapidly. "You, Ethan? You get to do whatever you want with it now," he said. "Rebuild it, reinvent it, or burn it down and start something new. It's yours." Her hands lowered slowly, the file pressed to her chest like something sacred. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. "But I did," he said. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks. "I don't know what to say." He stepped closer, brushing his thumb gently beneath her eye. "Say nothing." Her voice broke as she whispered, "No one's ever done anything like this for me before." She laughed through her tears, a soft, cracking sound of wonder. "I think I'm falling for you all over again." "Good," he said with a playful glint. And with that, he pulled her into another kiss, one deeper, surer, anchored by gratitude, and wrapped in something that had grown through darkness and found its way into the light. Sienna barely slept that weekend. Excitement curled through her veins like fire. Monday was coming, and so were they. Wanda Kane, Evelyn Kane, and Caleb, her ex-boyfriend, the ones who had mocked her, manipulated her, betrayed her, and now they were about to walk into a storm they never saw coming. The conference room on the top floor of Kane Industries buzzed with low conversation. Executives and department heads filled the long glass table, waiting for the mysterious new owner whose name had yet to be disclosed. Wanda walked in with her usual self-importance, Evelyn following behind in sharp heels and a tight smirk. Caleb, seated near the front, adjusted his tie. He was calm, confident, and oblivious. Then the doors opened, and the room stilled. Sienna walked in. She was graceful and composed. She looked radiant in a white blouse and tailored navy suit, not a hint of fear in her step. Her heels clicked like punctuation on the marble floor as she approached the head of the table. Wanda blinked. Evelyn's jaw parted slightly. Caleb froze mid-breath. Sienna didn't sit. She simply stood, dropped the folder of documents on the table with a clean, satisfying thud, and looked Wanda directly in the eye. "Good morning," she said smoothly. "I believe this meeting was scheduled to welcome the new majority owner." Wanda let out a forced chuckle. You're joking." "No," Sienna replied coolly. I am not." She pulled out the official shareholder document, flipping it toward Wanda. "I own 62% of Kane Industries. That means all decisions, policies, leadership begin and end with me." Wanda looked pale. Evelyn tried to speak, but her voice caught. Sienna's tone shifted. It became calm, sharp, and familiar. "You told me once, almost a year ago, that I had two choices. Marry or disappear, that you could end my father's treatment with a signature." She leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. "Well, now I'm giving you a choice. It's up to you. You stay or you leave." Wanda's lips quivered, but no words came. "And as for you," Sienna added, turning to Caleb without even a flicker of hesitation. "Caleb Raymond, head of PR, you are fired, effective immediately." His eyes widened. "What?" "You're untrustworthy and reckless, unfit to work in a company that stands for anything. You're dismissed, permanently." He stood up, flustered. "You can't just—" "I can," she cut in, "and I just did." Security stepped in, almost as if on cue. Caleb looked to Wanda, then to Evelyn, but neither met his eyes. Sienna watched as he was led out of the room, his shoulders slumped, his ego crumbling. When the door shut behind him, the silence returned. Sienna finally took her seat at the head of the table. She looked up and smiled. "Let's begin." Sienna returned home that evening with a different kind of peace in her heart. The kind that only came after taking back what was stolen, after walking through fire and coming out refined. She had done it. For her father, for herself, and she had done it with grace. The sun was setting as she stepped through the Callaway Estate's front doors. The sky outside glowed gold and rose, painting the world in celebration. Ethan was waiting in the garden, their garden. The one where they first said "I do" without love, but with purpose. Now he stood there with strength in his frame, his recovery visible in every steady step. A soft breeze rustled the leaves around him, and his hands were tucked behind his back like a nervous schoolboy. When she saw him, she smiled. "You're out here all alone?" "Not anymore," he said. She walked toward him, but he stayed still. And then he dropped to one knee. Sienna froze. "Ethan?" He pulled a small box from behind him and opened it to reveal a brilliant, custom-cut diamond ring. But it wasn't the sparkle that made her breath catch. It was the way he looked at her. "I never got to ask you myself," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You married me when I couldn't speak, when I couldn't move." He took a slow breath. "But now I can speak. And I can choose, and I choose you." Her eyes were already brimming with tears. "I want to marry you again," he continued. "Not for business, not for survival, but because you're the only home I've ever known." He smiled up at her, proud. "And this time I want the world to know. I want it loud, bold, and grand. I want everyone to see the woman who saved me." Sienna laughed through her tears. "You're ridiculous. I'm yours." She dropped to her knees in front of him and kissed him before the words could even leave her lips. Then she whispered into his ear, "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." The second wedding was everything the first was not. It was massive, magical, and bright. And the world watched. They said their vows again, this time in full voice, and they lived happily ever after. I hope you enjoyed this emotional millionaire CEO story. I know you won't want to miss the next one, so go ahead and subscribe now, and don't forget to turn on post notifications. See you in the next video.